Afternoon Talk on SAFM.
Thanks for that, Utsile. Well, my name is Ashraf Garda. This is the Afternoon Talk Show. Welcome to the show. Great cracking 2 hours coming up. That's my promise to you. Not that we're talking about the Cosatu March. That'll be covered in PM Live from 4 o'clock. And, of course, covered on the news, as you've heard Utsile certainly cover it right away. But I want you to call in 0891 104 207. We discussed the issue of Israel Apartheid Week a few days ago. We got lots of what I'd call them Israelis. So you had a Muslim Israeli who then didn't pitch, unfortunately. We had a Druze Israeli, and we had an Ethiopian Israeli in the studio here a couple of days ago, and they gave their story in terms of what they're doing in this country. It clearly comes across as a counter, as a buffer against what is Israel Apartheid Week. So we thought, let's get the other side of the story. We chat to Ronnie Kasrils, former minister, South African minister, is of course about Israel Apartheid Week in a moment. 0891 104 207. What, in fact, are your thoughts about it? That's the big question. Just the phrase Apartheid Week, is that fair to Israel, or should I say even fair to the state of Israel? Is that hopelessly unfair and just something emotional and explosive? Either way, back it up if you have a view on that issue. 34701 is the SMS number. If you're tweeting, cut me on the timeline, Ashraf Garda 1, and you need to like my Facebook fan page. There are comments already on that page. I'd love you to comment. I'll be able to pick up those comments right away. So that comes up for the first half an hour or so. And then after that, we've started, this is week 2 of the Community Heroes project, I should call it, or Nation Builders. So we're asking you, we've already got 3 guests lined up, but maybe a chance for you to squeeze in a quick call on that issue. We're asking you to name your heroes in your community who've done some exceptional work. And these are people who are, in effect, the unknown, the unsung heroes. But they've made a huge impact in your community. And if you remove them, you would feel that void, no question about that. So who, in fact, are they? We'll do that from 2:30 to 3. And then after 3 o'clock, the guest in the spotlight is Buti Manamela, the National Secretary of the Young Communist League. I wonder whether he should be protesting with Cosatu. We'll find out. Either way, he's coming to the studio. So we'll talk to him after 3, and I'm sure you have some great questions to ask him, including what does Buti Manamela think about Julius Malema? I'm sure about that. Anyway, let's get with the issues now of Israel Apartheid Week with former Minister Ronnie Kasrils. Good afternoon, Ronnie. Thanks for joining us.
Afternoon, thank you.
I should say congratulations on the wedding, by the way.
Thanks very much indeed. The wedding between a Jew and a Muslim, which shows common humanity,
indeed,
which shows the way the world's going and how we can operate and live in our country. Thanks very much. I've had wonderful wishes.
I should ask, because I bumped into Amina Frenzy the other day at the SABC, and I said, I should ask you whether, in the light of what you've just said, whether that's the type of diplomacy that is planned. You know, in the past, countries, leaders of countries sort of matchmake because it's strategic.
Oh, well, I'm well past politics and power issues. It's all a question of love. And she's the most wonderful and beautiful woman. Thank you.
All right. We'll talk more about that when we put you hopefully in the spotlight one of the days after 3 o'clock. Let's talk about Israel Apartheid Week. First of all, why the week, and why is it called that?
Well, it's been going now for about 8 years, gaining in its spread around the world. It's as a response to the Israeli apartheid policies and practices. Of course, it's against their brutal discrimination and measures against the Palestinian people, a people whose land they've usurped, dispossessed, both land and birthright. And the world has had enough of this apartheid-type practice. They are getting very worried about this, their isolation, the Israelis, which is why they send their, I would call them collaborators, their stooges. The apartheid regime in South Africa found its representatives as well from the Bantustan areas, as we know. But, you know, a good starting point, and there's several starting points that one could use, but a good one is the United Nations General Assembly Resolution of 1975, which declared both apartheid South Africa and Zionism as racist creeds and crimes against humanity. And this came about through the cooperation, on the one hand, of the ANC with the Palestinian organizations. We saw in them allies fighting a just cause. and very similar to the history that we had gone through, the dispossession of the land and the rights of our people. We came closer and closer. And at the same time, this was the collaborationist period of apartheid South Africa, with apartheid Israel, that axis, the support Israel gave to apartheid South Africa. Right. The recognition of Israel as an apartheid state comes about at that particular point in time, in fact.
Okay, now you made the point earlier about people from Israel visiting this country, call them collaborators, I don't know. I had a chat to some of them. They're very clear in their conviction. I'm not saying they're right. They clearly believe their story and almost find it surprising and abhorrent that you know, let's say someone like yourself and many other South Africans would even care to describe Israel and apartheid and use them in the same sentence, and they find it's terribly unfair. And these are people strategically, of course, who would be considered black in this country. Your thoughts about that? I mean who's misreading what?
You know, South Africa apartheid regime had plenty of people that it pulled to the fore, including Bantustan leaders and their supporters, those who benefited, who could sound quite plausible and appealing and spoke from their particular interest and position. So that's nothing unique about Israel being able to find an absolute minority of a minority of people, the 22%, 20% of Palestinians living within Israel itself. We claim apartheid practices and prejudice are used against the Palestinian people within Israel itself, leaving out what's happening, the dreadful segregation and brutality in the occupied areas.
So let me just
99% of Palestinians, more and more, are raising their voices against the practices of the Israeli government, denying them full citizenship and full rights, which is given to the people of Jewish origin, and any Jew in the world, as you know, has the right of return to a Jewish state, whereas Palestinians banished as refugees, driven out from 1948 by violence and terrorism, are denied any rights. They are denied the right in terms of United Nations resolution of the return of the refugees. I mean, this pure and simple shows that it is an apartheid state, Jewish state, and of course they will find people who they can throw crumbs to, who will benefit and will speak up in defense.
We'll talk more about that. Let me just remind you, we're chatting to former Minister Ronnie Kasrils, getting his views on Israel Apartheid Week. Of course, I'll take your calls. I want to get your views as well. And as I did the other day, let me just make this very clear. We're not interested in what happened 200-300 years ago. Let's just stay with the issues of maybe the last 10-15 years and the historical context of where we are and why, in fact, is Israel being described as an apartheid state on the one hand, and then on the other we look at why, in fact, there's an apartheid or Israel Apartheid Week, and there's been a counter to it, as you've heard 2 days ago. We've had guests here coming and trying to speak out against how they see the whole concept of Israel Apartheid Week as being wrong. So if you want to talk about that, that's fine. Also, I'm certainly fine with you welcoming suggestions in terms of how, in fact, the issues around those countries or country can, in fact, be resolved as opposed to going back hundreds of years ago. Will be constructive in that sense. So 0891 104 207. I'm going to get to some of the calls, including Gavin, in just a second. Ronnie, let's just talk to you about this point in particular. When we've had the guests here the other day, they were very clear that in fact these Palestinians or these Arabs who live in that country, they have rights. They go to parliament. They can vote. They have MPs. They live in communities where they live. To suggest that they are living separately by law, by decree, to suggest they have no rights, to suggest that they have to walk on the other side of the road is quite preposterous. Now, who is misreading what here? Tell me.
Well, it's interesting that all South Africans who were part of the freedom struggle in this country, who go to Israel and see with their eyes what's happening there, immediately we see this as so similar to our position, the position of black oppressed people in South Africa during the apartheid era. It's a whole range from church people to trade unionists, Archbishop Tutu, the leaders of the Communist Party, the ANC, people from civic organizations, Zaki Ahmed, you can just go on, like Jewish people who've been involved in the struggle here, Zapiro. We all see it instantly. They claim that Israel's a democracy, but it's like a South African apartheid democracy, which was a democracy, a privileged place for whites who had all the rights. They have been cleverer in Israel because they've sought and tried and sometimes succeeded to cover this up. They allow people of Palestinian or Arab origin living in Israel to come to Parliament, but they're so circumscribed there, they can't even challenge the question of Israel as a Jewish state, otherwise they get debarred. They can't raise real protest against the state and what it's doing, otherwise they are sanctioned.
Okay, I'm going to speak to you more about apartheid, Israel Apartheid Week specifically in this country in a moment. I need to take a couple of calls and get the listeners' views as well. Gavin in Amanzimtoti, hi.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Gavin.
Good afternoon.
Yes, you can go for it. We can hear you.
Could you just ask your callers to raise their voices, because I can't hear that voice.
Okay, Gavin, if you can please raise your voice so that former Minister Ronnie Kasrils can indeed hear you.
Good afternoon. I note that Ronnie Kasrils is very keen on claiming that Israel is an apartheid state, yet he doesn't seem to have much to say about countries such as, we'll take a classic example of Saudi Arabia. As he knows, no Jew or Christian may enter into the land of Saudi Arabia and settle there and practice his or her religion. There's no freedom to do so in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has a very tight control on society there.
Okay, Gavin, I'm going to...
an apartheid state.
Gavin,
it would be one such as Saudi Arabia.
Gavin, I'm going to interject you. Saudi Arabia, you may have a case in point, which is another subject for another day. Do you, in your opinion, believe that the way that Israel as a country, the way it is structured, is as close to South Africa pre-1990, in fact, as an apartheid state? We'll discuss Saudi Arabia some other time.
It's quite clear for anybody who makes an objective study of the facts that Israel is not an apartheid state.
Why do you say so?
Well, on what grounds do you say that it is?
Gavin, I'm asking a question. That's my job here.
Well, I'm countering your question with a very valid question.
Well, you're not going to get any further with that.
Make all kinds of claims and allegations, but nobody can actually substantiate their claims that Israel is an apartheid state.
All right, let me bring in my guest here on the line. Ronnie Kasrils, former minister.
Thanks. I wonder if Gavin knows that Palestinians in Israel itself, talking about within Israel, are not permitted to join the Israeli Defense Force. Being a member of the Israeli Defense Force, by the way, is your passport to incredible privilege, huge pensions, health benefits, all sorts of privileges for you and your family. So, as one example of the fact that Israel practices apartheid, debars Palestinians in this manner from serving in the military, and through that debars them from the pension privilege, residential privileges, incredible forms of privilege that Israelis serving in the Defense Force receive.
Okay. Gavin, thanks for that call. Let's get to some of the other callers as well. Mohammed, we're talking to you in just a second. Sebastian in Cape Town, hi.
Yes, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Look, I think really what any listener should realize is that you're getting a totally propagandaed and twisted diatribe from ex-Minister Kasrils, who's a well-known pursuer of this particular agenda of his. So whatever he's saying is going to be twisted propaganda laid and not...
Well, I'll tell you what I see, Sebastian, is I get 2 or 3 guests here on Monday, and I get one side of a story, and I certainly hear former Minister Ronnie Kasrils with another side of the story, and the callers are equally divided, and it's almost like one team's winning 6-0, the other team's losing 6-0. And I think for listeners who don't know the history, they're finding it incredibly hard to understand it.
Well, knowing some of the history, that's why I can make statements about Mr. Kasrils. But if he wants to go about participation of non-Jews in Israeli Defense Forces, firstly, Negev Bedouin and Druze are permitted to serve in the IDF. Now, serving in the IDF is actually an onerous obligation of 3 years for men and 2 years for women, basic training followed by up to 60 days per year in the reserves till quite an advanced age into your 40s and 50s. So there may be privileges attached to it, but there's an onerous burden attached. So, and the reason they do not conscript Israeli Arab citizens is that if there was a war, these citizens might find themselves in a very hard situation of having to participate in conflict against people of kin of theirs. So there's particular reasons for this.
Okay, Sebastian.
But those two groups. What I would like to raise is one thing that if you look at the Israeli population, the Jewish population, there's actually a very large African diaspora within Israeli Jewry. In fact, before the Russian immigration, the majority Israeli Jew was actually a refugee from the Arab country of the Middle East, Arab North Africa, with a later migration from Ethiopia. So, of people of all shades of color, basically. So, it's not the myth of European colonialists having invaded a poor Middle Eastern country and displaced the native population.
Okay.
These are the native populations of the Middle East who were there long before any Muslim conquest and colonization, who've actually been turned out of their own lands, and it's eventually driven
Sebastian,
a million of
I'm
them in
move
48, now almost none in those countries. And when rockets rain down on Israel, these rockets are raining down on
Sebastian, I got to move on. I've made the point. You're clearly not listening to me. We've got about 7 minutes to go. We want one specific point, and not going into history over years and years. Doesn't matter what. We're talking about the last 20 years. I want to talk more specifically about just the Israel Apartheid Week in terms of what it does in this country in a moment. But I'll take one more call before I get to the other callers as well. And please be brief because time against us here. Mohammed on the line. Hi.
Hi, thanks a lot, Ashraf.
Pleasure.
Ashraf, I think there are two things. The one is that there's a comparison that is being made between apartheid South Africa and current-day Israel. Mm-hmm. And we have esteemed people that have visited, struggle stalwarts that have visited Palestine and Israel, and have come back saying that indeed the shoe does fit. I mean, we have people such as Archbishop Desmond Tutu, General Secretary of COSATU, Zolinzi Mavavi. In fact, our own Deputy President of this country, Kgalema Motlanthe, when he returned, he went beyond. He said that it's not only like apartheid South Africa, but it's actually far worse than apartheid South Africa. However, Ashraf, the second thing is beyond the comparison between the two situations, is that Israel, in fact, fits the legal definition of committing the crime against apartheid, the crime
against
of
humanity.
apartheid. And I think that the most relevant source for this is the Human Sciences Research Council, which is a statutory body, and it was commissioned by our own government in 2009 to investigate whether Israel is guilty of the crime of apartheid. And indeed, the report, the investigating team reported that Israel is guilty of the crime
Mohammed,
of apartheid.
thanks for making that point. I'll move on. I'll get to Mario and Mshlanga just a second. Former Minister Ronnie Kasrils, let's just talk very quickly because time against us here on this one. In terms of the specifics of Israel Apartheid Week, what exactly is being done this week?
Well, there are meetings, discussions, film shows all over the country, all the main cities, the universities, and so on, public meetings, speakers. And the whole point here, as elsewhere in the world, is to educate people. I think some of those who phoned in, like the person before, really needs educating. They're just utterly blind and emotional. Jews need to understand the inhumanity of the Israeli Zionist government. So it's to reach out to all our people, whatever color, whatever creed, whatever background, to make them aware of this absolutely dreadful injustice, brutality that's taking place year after year, decade after decade against the Palestinians. Nelson Mandela said, we South Africans can't feel free whilst the Palestinians are not free, recognizing their suffering, recognizing the racist discrimination and so on. And it's to inform our people, to mobilize them, and the point is to organize boycotts, divestments, sanctions against Israel.
Is it working?
From our own experience, because that's what helped to topple the apartheid regime.
And very quickly, is it working?
Yes, it is. I mean, that's why the Israeli government are dispatching all these characters abroad to all these countries to try and counter the clear-cut message which we're putting across. Your last speaker, I think his name was Mohammed, spoke very clearly about that, and this is happening throughout Europe and the Americas, North and South, throughout Africa, throughout Asia. There's a mighty current that's building up that's going to emulate the anti-apartheid movement against apartheid South Africa, because that's needed to deal with the crime of apartheid Israel and its dreadful occupation, its brutal occupation of the West Bank, its blockade, the cruel blockade of Gaza, and the second-class status of non-Jews living within Israel itself.
Okay, let me take two very, very quick calls. That's all I can take. Mklanga in KwaZulu-Natal. Hi.
Yes, hello.
Yeah, please be brief.
Yes, indeed, the Israelites, what they are doing to Palestinians, you cannot be able to equate it to the South African apartheid system. Apartheid South Africa was nothing. Slavery was nothing compared to what those people are doing to their fellow human beings. They have encaged them. They have taken their land, which was 100% Palestinian, is less than 22%. They treat them like, not even like pets, not even like animals.
And you know that because
like people who are not coming from the planet, but they treat them as things that have never existed.
Okay, Mklanga, and you know that because you were there?
Mklanga, alone that
very quickly.
In South Africa, you never had the helicopters shooting people in their houses, throwing bombs in their houses.
Okay.
But we have seen that they even gone down doing the same thing, trying to look for one soldier in the country that is run by Hezbollah.
Okay, so I've got that. Thanks so much. We're going to have to move on. Time against us. Thanks for that one. Last call I'm going to take is Mario in Port Elizabeth. Hi, Mario.
Hi there.
Please,
I just want to say the previous caller must actually read the history about Israel before he makes comments that they took their land. What I want to say is we cannot equate it to South African apartheid for the simple reason we're sitting with two different religions all over the world. We're sitting with two different religions that is not compatible with each other. There's this problem, and it's never gonna come right. If you can get peace between these two religions all over the world, you might have a chance that those people will be able to have some sort of a homeland or their own country in that area.
Got that, Mario. And if you get it right, they'll call you Super Mario. I'm sure of that. Thanks for that one, Mario and PE. Former Minister Ronnie Kasrils, we've got 30 seconds to... Okay, you're on the hotline. 30 seconds to wrap up.
I just wanted to say that it's great to hear people coming in and so clear, as the last speaker was, about the real nature of Israel and the lot of the people within the occupied areas and the Palestinians within Israel. We look to our government, this is part of the mobilization, to put greater pressure on the Israeli government. Civil society must speak up. We must follow with COSATU and the solidarity committees around our country and implore our government to be champions of the fight and the struggle, the just struggle of the Palestinians for their rights. After all, and I repeat again, Nelson Mandela said we cannot feel free until the Palestinians have their freedom.
Okay, and that's where we're going to leave it. Thank you so much for your time, former Minister Ronnie Kasrils, reflecting and being very much an integral part of Israel Apartheid Week. Tell you what, if you want to email further on this issue, you certainly can do so. Ashraf@safm.co.za. You can also tweet about it on my Twitter page, Ashraf Garda 1, and on my Facebook page. You need to like it first to do that. I'll read some of your SMSs in a moment as we get into community heroes. But right now, time for the news headlines.